Yeah,
I'll start with that, and then I'll come back to your question, because I think it's an important one. So, Freedom Schools really arose out of the civil rights movement, and at the heart of what the Freedom Schools were really trying to address, knowing that there were inequities within schools, it was basically above and beyond what Black students in the South would do at school. There were summer programs that would be an intensive learning experience for Black youth, where they, especially for those who might be food insecure, it was ensuring that they got access to meals, but they also got access to an educational curriculum that they wouldn't traditionally receive within a typical school. And fast forward over the years, Freedom Schools still exists today. I taught at Freedom School. The Children's Defense Fund continues to run Freedom School programs within Minnesota today. And when we were trained to be Freedom School teachers, we touched on many of the things that you talked about in terms of really thinking about areas of trauma, toxic stress, and even putting us through some scenarios to be able to understand what that feels like, and just kind of raising some awareness around those things. And so I oftentimes wonder if, like, the work that has been done in that area, is that an opportunity to be able to enhance the education? I know talking about enhancing what education looks like from an educational preparation perspective, that's a big conversation to have in terms of like what's required. But we have to be thinking outside the box, because if we just continue to do what we have been doing, it's not working.
Right.
And to your point, when you think about kids that have been in refugee camps, kids who spent their formative years in like orphanages, with my work with the Minnesota Organization of Fetal Alcohol Syndrome, we had a number of kids that spent their formative years in orphanages in like Romania and Russia, with not a lot of stimulation, not a lot of daily interaction. And when you begin to look at like what those symptoms look like, the symptoms of being institutionalized can look very similar to the symptoms that you might see with a kid who was in a refugee camp, which can look similar to what you might see in a child who's been diagnosed with autism or oppositional defiant disorder or reactive attachment disorder. And so you see like all of these symptoms, and our schools are oftentimes not in the best position to even know what the root cause of those issues are. And without some understanding of that, it's really easy to have these kids misdiagnosed, or it's really easy to think that maybe this is a behavioral issue, and let's like classify this child as having let's put them in like EBD services, which may actually make things worse in some situations if you're not really understanding those pieces. So it definitely is a complex piece, and ensuring that we're properly preparing teachers has to be part of that community conversation about how do we get there, and how do we ensure that we're moving further upstream so people get that information.
Ruth, do you have any information about when did the school expulsions, when did that start to become a thing?
That's a really good.
I can tell my first experience. I was an early childhood educator for over 40 years, and when I worked at Learning Tree, and I believe it was Shoreview, they expelled a 4-year-old. And my premise has always been, you look for, if there's behavior, you look for the why. You look for the reason why it's happening.
Within the environment.
Yeah. And so I came out of retirement in 2014, and last year I joined Reading Corps. So I'm in South St. Paul Kaposia Education Center, where his son is, and I love it. They are community oriented. They have a food distribution right in the school. They've got we have ESL.
And the food distribution, they really work hard that all families go.
Oh, and they
get rid of the
also
stigma.
yep. They also have Spanish-speaking staff that work with the parents. This is I'm pre-K, so I'm working with 4-year-olds that will turn 5 and go to kindergarten next year. And within our wing of all-day pre-K, we also, this is the first year that they've hired somebody specifically for that pre-K, a behavior specialist. So we have somebody that we can call, and they'll come down to the classroom. We're also fortunate that we've got a special ed person right next door to our classroom, so that they have really made an effort to support both the teacher and the children in whatever is the reasons behind. And they also use, I took a lot of training with them last year. They use a model called conscious discipline, and I've been real impressed by too. But years and years ago, when you speak about model cities, I was Ramsey Action Program's Head Start. I was a center manager, and I was a Parkview. And at that time, we had all. They qualified, but I had children from Africa and Brazil and all over because they were going to the U and stuff. So yeah, I mean, to me, you could ban, but what's needed is support for the staff and for the children and the families. Period. And that's part of what Head Start does with their family person that goes out to your social workers that go out to the families.
And you make a really important point too, because the support for the educators and for the staff is critical too, because when you're in a situation where you're serving families with complex needs, families with high needs, secondary traumatic stress is a real thing. I mean, and that definitely has an impact on people as well, and so that support is so important.
It just makes such a difference to have an extra staff person in the classroom, numbers-wise.
This is not a new problem. 50 years ago, my son was held back in kindergarten because he would be too disruptive in first grade.
Well,
so that's a mild case, and I'm sure it's gotten worse since.
Can we use that as a segue to my question?
Yeah.
On what's the pushback you're hearing on why are people
opposed?
Yeah, I mean, let's use the Senate as an easy. You said there's lots of violence. So let's just blame the Senate right now because that'll make it easier.
Well, I won't just blame the Senate because it was bigger than the Senate.
Well, right, but I mean, it did get through the House.
Without identifying any people, I will just say that some of the concern that was raised was, I heard things like, well, what do we do about the violent preschoolers? Like, what's our response?
They're this big.
What's our response to that? I've heard, well, if we say that schools don't have the ability to suspend these kids, what do they have? What can they do? And it's like, well, state statute. Oh goodness. But state statute deals with removal from classrooms. So if there are health or safety concerns, there's nothing within banning suspensions that would stop a child if needing to be removed from a setting. They could still be removed, but then the question is, what are you going to do with that child once they are removed? And then that goes into and then you get into sort of this quagmire of challenges with seclusion and thinking about like restraints, which is not the answer. Let's just make that clear. That definitely is that definitely is not the answer. But other sort of feedback was about schools feeling unprepared to deal with students with really complex needs. It's just sort of, we don't know what to do.
But schools weren't prepared for pre-K, and they built facilities to do that. I mean,
Yeah. Well, and I think going back to the root of your question in terms of like, what was sort of the tipping point in some of this? I think it goes back years, and even thinking about some of the disparities that we're seeing specifically within the Indigenous and within the Black communities, one of the biggest, I think, kind of blows to Black students was with Brown versus Board of Education. There was a shadow side, because once there was school integration, there were a number of Black teachers who were fired, who were reassigned, who were let go, who were demoted, and so you had a class of established Black teachers who were then pushed out. And to this day, we're still dealing with that legacy, because when we talk about the increasing the number of teachers of color, we talk about the Grow Your Own program, those are really part of the legacy of teachers being pushed out. And when you think about teachers, oftentimes people's families, they were teachers for generations. It's like their parents were teachers, and then they became teachers, and then like the role that they played within the community, like thinking back to model cities and really having that sort of community-based care where people live in the community. You see those families in the community, and you can hold those kids accountable in the community with their parents at the grocery store. It's like, yeah, see you, you know. And so it's like, and you lost that, and we're still trying to get that back today.
I was just gonna say, just yesterday, there was a 4-year-old. The mother came in to have a conversation with the administration and behavior team about the sibling. So there was a 4-year-old pre-K-er that's been in school less than 6 weeks. And so the first go-to that the system had was to refer her to special ed. And so I was concerned about that, and I challenged it. But the paperwork's already there, the documentation's already there that this 4-year-old should be going to a special ed service. And I've also worked with that child because about an hour a day I work with pre-K. I don't see it. So when I talked about it, it was one of those things where they just said, well, you know, pre-K, or like you were talking about, like the early school, they do it as far as to be proactive. But the way I saw it was that the system needed to be checked, because there were a lot of things within the system that were wrong. Like there was, there's a new teacher. She's good. She's learning. We've all been new. We all started, right? There's just putting her in the category and saying that she should go to like Fraser because her sibling needs it, you know, and all that. So it's a deeper problem we see regularly. But like I said, she's been there less than 6 weeks.
How do they even have enough documentation in less than 6 weeks?
Well, they have stuff like, oh, she pushed the chair over. Oh, she
That's still
you know,
not enough documentation.
she hit just little 4-year-old behavior, and being in the classroom, it's not just that child.
Right.
So, and the parents don't know where to go. You know, the parents are interested. They know that it's that they need to do something about it. But again, parents and they're the ones that they love to school. You know, we're supposed to take care
and they
of them,
trust that we're
and
the
they don't
experts,
know what
and
to
yeah.
do.
Here and then Clee.
Yeah, do you think integration itself posed some challenges maybe that we couldn't address or we weren't good at addressing as far as?
Well, this is just my opinion, so I will frame it as that because I wasn't there. But to just say that I think that shadow side of teachers being pushed out, that had a huge impact. And I think the ability to be able to go to school and see reflections of yourself, and you know, that whole saying about representation matters, it really does. And so I think that that was one of the most harmful, and that wasn't because of integration. It's because there were decisions made to push people out.
Why didn't they
teachers.
just, if they were integrating the schools, why didn't they integrate the teachers too at the same time?
Not everyone was happy about integration. I was going to say, really? There were some people who were not necessarily happy about that. But I also think it sort of goes to this idea as well of thinking about what we think of as behaviors with with students, because and even in my own experience, I've had conversations with principals and with vice principals, because my son was he's like the life of the party. He's gonna be the kid that's like dancing down the hallway and just deciding I'm gonna dance in the middle of class today. And I've had teachers who recognize that, and I will shout out Miss Kennelly, because she's one of my favorite teachers ever that Sean had. She recognized that, and they actually worked with him, and it's okay, if we can get you to stop dancing down the halls and dancing on tables, we will let you dance for the entire school at the end of the year. And you know what? He stopped dancing on tables and doing dance interludes during lessons. And then at the end of the year, he got to dance for the entire school. And but then you also have the situations of when you have sort of that kid who is considered disruptive, not necessarily in a violent way, but just generally disruptive. And when you look at the number one reason here in Minnesota that kids are being suspended from school, it is disruption. Pushing over a chair is considered a disruption. Running out of the classroom without permission is considered, a disruption. So you're not necessarily even talking about something that is, equating with physical violence, but it's also understanding that when you have these challenges, if we're not looking for strategies that are sometimes outside the box, it can become really easy to just start to begin to focus on this is a disruption. This is a bad kid who is disrupting. And I had one situation with him of where it was I got called in the principal's office, and it's just he's talking too much. This is too much of a disruption. We can't have this happening. And I was okay, I will talk to him. We're going to tone down the disruptions. And then the next day I get a call from the school, and it's oh, we don't know. He just isn't talking today. He's not saying anything. He's not saying anything to anyone. We're nervous. What do we do? And so then I came to the school and I sat down and I said, okay, so I've been in your office now because he's talking too much. Now I'm in your office because he won't say anything at all. Can you give me a script of how you want him to present every day, so that he can check off the list of, I'm going to talk, but not too much.
But then will be time.
Yeah.
And at that moment, there was almost a light bulb kind of came on, because it was you tell me what you need from him so that we can give it to you. Because if you can't tell me what you need, he can't give it to you.
Right. But I also think that that's kind of there's this bias of what schools should look like and sound like, and every child needs to fit into that mold.
Yes.
Yep.
And that is just doesn't work.
Yeah.
It doesn't work at all. And especially when you look at when you're talking about younger kids and they're being disruptive. Well, they're being disruptive because we are now expecting children who are 5 and 6 year old to sit in a desk and read and write and do math all day and not move their bodies and not jump and roll around and spin and dance and twirl and do what they're built to do. But so in my classroom, we have no desks. We work on the floor and we roll around and we have couches and whatever. And if you need to stand in this corner and spin and read your book, I don't care, because you're not disrupting my class, because we're all just making noise in here.
And trust me, that doesn't change much, because I worked with adolescents,
Right,
and
when
they
they get
needed
older,
to move
there's
too.
only like this window of 3 months when they will actually sit still. But everything else, they're like, we're old and we need to talk to our friends.
I'm
we're young, we need to
36 and
talk.
I have a standing desk with a whiteboard
Right.
because I still can't.
Because we all have this it's like human nature that you need to move and interact with people, but we've decided straight rows and facing the front and whatever. And then when you throw in all of the cultural things that are coming in with all different kinds of people, then that expectation totally changes too. And we're trying to make everybody be middle class white America, and that doesn't work. And so, I think it goes back to we need to retrain how we think about who's coming into our classrooms and what we can do. Because you shouldn't have had to say, give me a script of what my son needs to do. You should have been, you need to adapt your classroom to make it work for my son.
Yeah.
That's how it needs to be. And I realize you can't make it work perfectly for every child in your class, because that doesn't work. But you can take a broad thing and be like, they're 5. They shouldn't sit in desks. Let's fix that. Sometimes it's an easier solution than people put forth.
Letting him dance at the end of the school
Yeah,
year.
right.
Simple solution that solved everything.
Or if he was dancing in the back of the room reading his book and nobody's watching him, who cares?
Right.
It's kind of
Oh,
that.
people watched.
Yeah, I know. Some kids are
Well, he
very
was just that good.
Some kids
he
are
was
very
just
good
that
at getting
good.
people to watch. But you know what I mean?
That's a proud mom right there.
Yeah. But you know what I mean?
For me, it goes back to seeing students as people and not data,
Right.
which was why I got out of teaching, because it felt like everything was so much more focused on
Oh, it
test
is.
scores and referrals and minutes on task and all of that other nonsense, rather than this is a kid who loves to dance and we can channel that into something productive. And so that's my concern, is how do we go back to recognizing that we're working with individual young people, and I was working with adolescents and felt like they weren't looking at that anymore.
And to give them an opportunity to focus on the things that light them up,
Right.
and the space to be able to do
Yeah,
that.
maybe not everyone had to take Algebra 2, and that we needed to have a lot more opportunities and options of things that they were passionate about, that there were things that they were going to pursue for the rest of their lives. And not even just career-oriented, because I think we get so caught up on that, but just things that enhance their joy and develop them as human beings, and
And
got
the
them
leftovers
to,
they're shrinking.
yeah. Oh, absolutely.
They're shrinking.
I think that-
Wait, I'm sorry.
Well, I found my son was ADD, and I was very agreeable with all these extra programs and things for them to try to keep him off meds. So then, my daughter, not a problem child, not in need of extra help, but the school gets different funding brackets for how many people. My children were adopted from Columbia. They are brown, and I got them as infants. English is the only language they know. Need another person to get to the next level of funding. She's in English as a second language class. A large group of girls with color that were getting in trouble. Okay, one more kid gets them to the next level of funding. My child is in a classroom of only 10 of the kids that got in the most trouble in her school. But because I was agreeable with my son, they thought it was escaped, that they were going to, I had to go head to head with the principal over, you are not playing that game with my daughter, and not realizing my son was going through a lot of shit that I didn't realize, and he, knowing that I was white and never had to face it, he didn't say to me, and my daughter told me. So, but this quota for different funding for different amount of kids in a program, that should end too. It should be per pupil. You have so many kids that need this help, that's what your funding should be. not, you get the 10th one, you get more bucks, because it was difficult. And a lot of the helps that they tried for my son were not good helps. I mean, when he has a test-taking issue, they put him in a math class and I said, well, okay, so are you going to help him with tests? Well, no, we can't do that. I said, well, the reason he isn't doing in standard math, he gets all his assignments, he gets good scores on all his assignments, he gets bad scores on the tests, and the tests are 58% of the grade. Well, in here, the test is 72% of the grade. I said, are you going to help him with the test? Well, no. Then he isn't going into this class. Well, I'm sorry, he's in here now for this semester. And it's just like, that's, kids need, my son was ADD. He did eventually go on meds. And it was dealing with on meds. And he had one counselor, beautiful Egan High School, that yelled across the hall, Eric, have you taken your meds yet today? Oh. And then I talked to her at conference. And conference was everybody, all the different teachers on tables in the cafeteria.
Yeah.
And when I told her, my son said that, and that if she wants his cooperation, she can't do things like that. She yelled across the cafeteria to someone 4 tables away, hey, John, she says that I yell in the hall about the kids. She did it right there to me, I mean, it's just like,
It's just consistent.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's
The culture.
yeah.
That's against privacy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's like,
And she was supposed to be his help coordinator or something. So it's just like,
Can I follow that up with a comment and a question? So my first comment is like listening to you talk about all of this. Last year, and you were part of it, you were in a couple of our videos.
yeah.
We had the opportunity to do videos for the AFL-CIO on labor and sort of why that matters. And I'm forgetting his name. I was looking through my email because I feel like an a-hole that I can't remember people's names, but that's pretty standard for me. But one of the people that we featured was a black social studies teacher. And the comment at the time he made, and I thought it was just amazing, was he was only one of 12 in the entire state of Minnesota. There was a black male teaching high school in Minnesota. Like one of 12. And you talk about discrimination and how we also worked on teachers not being there. It was
Like the House of Representatives was one of 130, or 4 of 134.
I think no respect. But how do we work on getting more people in? Because I do web development and video and those things. And there's a lot of programs in Minneapolis where companies are actually paid to take high school students to intern. How do we get more? There's a lot of those programs. I'm not going to list just one.
Yeah.
How do we work on bringing more people into these programs? How do we work on, because I know me personally, like, I benefited. I mean, I met Ann by going to college and those things. But how do we show opportunities? I mean, Ann and I both joke all the time that we had no idea that was even a career path. Wish I knew about that when I was 20 versus 36. My second question, and I'm not from Kansas, I am from Kansas. So hearing Brown v. Board always resonates with me. I'm not from Minnesota. So all the people that, I know Minnesota has this cult following that open enrollment is this amazing thing. But my question is, like, how much is open enrollment a problem to this? Because I view open enrollment like if you're rich and you have the money, you can go pick where your kid goes. If you don't have the time and you're trying to frankly survive, you're going to go to the easy option. I know that's a loaded question.
Yeah.
You're welcome to not answer it.
Oh no.
But like I went to a rural high school where of 112 students, 10 of us went to college, and that includes junior college. And looking at Facebook, that number has stayed the same.
Well, I think it's a really important question because it's not just about building systems, it's about building access. And the access piece is where I think that we see that there is a lot of inequity in terms of just awareness
and I see like open enrollment as like separate
Yeah.
but unequal. Because if you have the means, you can move.
Well, and even more than the means, it's like the knowledge to even know what is possible. I mean, I was the first person in my family to go to college, and I started at the University of Minnesota when I was at Central High School. And I didn't start as a post-secondary student, because I was doing post-secondary before most students did. It wasn't because someone told me about it. I just happened to find out about it. I came across this catalog, and I'm like, oh, you can do that? you can go to college instead of high school, and like it's all paid for, and like your books are paid for. It's like, why wouldn't you do this? And it's like I took the 16 down to the university, and I'm just okay, what do I got to do this? And I got the steps, and I followed the steps, and I got in. And it's like, oh, okay. But that wasn't because there was this like great communication stream out there that was saying like this is possible. I was one of, I think at the time, like 6 students at the University of Minnesota who were post-secondary students, and we all kind of huddled together because we didn't really know what was going on. We were trying to kind of figure out all of these things together, and it's like, and fast forward now, it's like people know post-secondary is an option. They know that college in the schools is an option for a lot of individuals as well, but there are still a lot of inequities in terms of who's taking advantage of those things, because the question is, when do you know it is an option? And what are people doing to prepare you for that option as well? Because a lot of times what I've noticed is that people find out about things when it's too late. And it's the same thing for kids.
The news doesn't cover things until it was, oh, look at who got in.
Yeah. And then it's the same thing with kids with disabilities, because when you're thinking about transition planning, because for kids who maybe aren't going to take the traditional route and graduate at 18, maybe they're going to be in a transition program until they're 21. If that transition planning doesn't start early, it's not going to be effective.
Yep.
And when does transition planning start early? When parents are well educated and know that it's an option.
Yep.
And when does it start for people who have no idea that it was even an option? It's like, oh, my kid's 18 now and I can have like these services. And then when you look back at the research in terms of kids with disabilities and employment, kids with disabilities who are employed before they are 18 are more likely to be employed after they're 18. So it's like when we're missing these windows of opportunity, we're missing the windows to have more equity within all of our systems. And so part of the challenge, I think, and part of what the community really has to be able to come around is like how do we ensure that people even know what those options are? Because thinking about families where English, truly is their second language, how do they know what opportunities are available?
Or families where parents are working 2 and 3 jobs.
Or
because I used to have
a caregiver of someone with a disability, and you are literally just trying to keep your head above water.
Exactly. So it's not anything about not being well-meaning, but you just literally don't have the time or energy to do what you'd like to do for your child, and then there's so much judgment and stuff around that, because I saw that a lot. Like, why didn't they come to an IEP meeting? Well, did you know this is the second job, and they're lucky if they have a 20-minute break where we can do a phone conference. And if that's going to be at 5 o'clock at night, then that's when we should meet. But like, a lot of parents didn't even know that, like,
there's
maybe
5
there could be
families
an
that have that
option.
same time frame.
Right. Right. So there's so many obstacles that we're not even looking at, again, because we want everybody to fit into that nice mold
So
and
they
what's
were
convenient for
just in
us.
survival mode.
Yep,
They're
exactly.
literally in survival mode.
And then, can I ask a question of what exactly open enrollment really means? Because I don't understand it. What it meant to me back in my day when I was in high school was I went 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th to A school. And then my mother remarried and moved to North St. Paul. I was at Humboldt. And I had no choice but to go to Humboldt. I mean, from Humboldt to North High, because that's where we were now living. I wanted to finish my last year at Humboldt. It would have cost me over $1,000, and I had no $1,000 to pay to go to school at Humboldt my senior year. So for my senior year, I went to North High, North St. Paul, which is a hard thing to do for somebody that's gone from.
Well, you've got all your relationship building.
Right, and I had gone to St. Matthew's before that, so I mean, I knew I was the neighborhood kid, and now I'm in a new school, and I am the last one to arrive, and I didn't know anyone. But to me, open enrollment meant if I had wanted to, I could have stayed at.
As long as you got yourself there.
Right, and I had a way to do that because my stepfather was a postal employee, so he would get me in there really early.
Yeah.
But I mean, I did that my junior year, kind of under the radar.
So open enrollment is a really mixed bag. And I know that the question I asked was sort of inflammatory. So living in South St. Paul, I've run the last 3 school levies and bond issues here in town. There are some areas that really benefit. South St. Paul, for example, 1/3 of their students come from outside of the district. South St. Paul without open enrollment as a school district would really struggle. South St. Paul's benefit, however, is it had IB K through 12 as the first in the state. It had the International Baccalaureate program as like the first in the state. There's a lot of things, and I'm going to brag because
I love South St.
I live here now, and our child's now 5th generation here in town. There are good things. The bad things, however, are you have to have the means to research on where you want to send a kid. If there's not enough population for a density for a district, there are some circumstances where districts have buses to other areas, but they're sort of few and far between. But in theory, living here, we could send our kid to Edina, which to me means if you have the means
And the
to
money.
the means.
The means, yeah.
I'm going to leave that
Yeah.
vague and broad, and it can mean a lot of things.
In the 70s, open enrollment was to not have to pay to bus people.
Yeah.
They would do the open enrollment. And I went to the poorest, smallest high school in the city of St. Paul, and they couldn't get minorities to come in.
Mm-hmm.
So, senior year, we show up for school one day, and every teacher in the building that didn't have tenure was no longer there, and they were replaced with a person that was African American. Really nice teachers. Assistant principal was a little off the ball, but maybe he needed to be, and it's like, because no one that had a choice that was in the African American community was going to send their kid and make the effort to get their kid to the poorest school. I mean, we didn't qualify for a lot of the funds that schools in the Afro-American community had better gym equipment, they had pools, we had nothing. So it's like, open enrollment didn't work for St. Paul Monroe.
Yeah.
It's now an elementary school.
Right. But I think like in South St. Paul, like open enrollment's been incredibly beneficial for the community. It's one of the few districts, like the city borders and the school district actually match. So if you watch the city council elections, it's always hilarious when the city council members take credit for the schools, and you're like, technically that's different. but I mean, I think at the same time, then just, I mean, I work in Northeast Minneapolis, so let's pick an easy location. If I live in Northeast Minneapolis, North Minneapolis, and I'm white and I work for Target, I'm going to send my kids to Egan. Hence why so many of this, like, the population, like who lives there versus who's going to school there, and we look at all the negativity on Minneapolis schools. Who lives in the neighborhood and who judges the school as bad don't line up. I don't have an answer.
Humble had a reputation also. I mean, I heard a lot about
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's lots of areas. I was just picking an easy location because that's where I work. And
Even though I never saw, what people said was happening there. It was like, oh, really? Huh, I never saw that.
Right.
But there was talk of fights in the halls all the time and knife fights or whatever. It's like, really? Huh. I missed all that.
But we have a 4-year-old.
Yeah.
You hear the news, you don't know, you don't have experience with the school. Okay, my kid's not going to go there. Where do I hear good things? I mean, to some degree, it comes down to what school does better PR. And that's not the job of schools.
So, can I go back to the 4-year-olds?
Yeah.
To me, expelling a child that young is ridiculous, but I understand the dynamics as to why that might happen. How do we change it? What do you need to get that bill passed?
What is going to get that bill passed is having a coalition of people showing up in support of that bill. So being prepared to testify in support, being prepared to reach out to your respective representatives and senators. So it's going to need to be a coalition of support. And I also think it's really important that we center the voices of the families who have been most impacted by these disparities. And one of the questions that I put to some of the schools when we were talking about this bill, it's like when this report came out from the Minnesota Department of Human Rights, like really detailing the disparities in black and white, here's the data, here's the research on this. The one question that I've asked schools whenever I got the opportunity, it's like, so when you see this data, and not just the overall data, but the data for your specific school, because each school is going to be, sort of in a different place, and so understanding that. What has your school done, especially for those where there were conciliation agreements that were reached in terms of things that needed to change in terms of specific schools? What have your schools done in terms of restorative practices? What have you done with the families who have been impacted by this to try to acknowledge that it's occurred and try to work towards having some sort of restorative moment to build trust within that community? And typically the answer was no, we haven't done anything like that. And so I think that it's really important that those who have been impacted by this get a chance to share how it has impacted them. And I think in terms of thinking about moving forward, it's about building that coalition. And it's also about our communities holding our schools accountable to this as well in terms of that restorative piece. Because I mean, that's the nature of the restorative practices. It's like we hold each other accountable within that work, and we acknowledge wrongs. And when that occurs, we also do the work to try to do some sort of healing. Because without that, it's hard to move forward. It's difficult. If we're not going to acknowledge that there's an issue, if we're not going to try to work towards any healing within the families that have been impacted by this, it's going to be difficult to get the right people at the table in order to craft a solution. Because the next steps, even beyond getting this passed, is thinking about, okay, even if we get this ban passed on preschool suspensions, what's the next step for communities in terms of ensuring that families have the support that they need, the schools have the support that they need.
The other thing too that I think, early childhood education teachers have never been paid well at all.
Oh yeah.
My first job in 1974 was $2.50 an hour, and my highest paid job working for District 833 as a before and after school supervisor was $11 an hour. And so, to me, when I talk to people, because you don't go into teaching to make money, and you put in so many extra hours just because that's the type person that are teachers. I got to Kaposha at 7:30 this morning and I left at 5. I only have to put in for reading
I waved
corps.
at you.
Oh, you waved at me? I didn't see you again. Everybody always know. I have some of my kids too. Miss Sharon, we saw you. I waved at you. But no, it's like I only need, for reading corps, I only need to put in 7 hours a day to be full time, and yet that I think that's part of the piece. For me, my Social Security is less than my living allowance with reading corps, and anybody looking back now or looking forward, anybody that is making minimum wage is going to be in the same boat that I am in, or worse.
Well, and so often what happens in those situations, those same teachers who are underpaid are also going in their pockets for the students.
Oh, I do all the time.
yeah.
When
Yeah.
when Target had the 20, you could get 20% off. 5% plus the 15. I stopped it for the whole year. Thank you. So, that's part of
I
it.
wanted to add something that's different, but it was kind of addressing what he was talking about earlier. Is you're talking about the recruitment of teachers of color. Well, there's the next step too. There's the accountability of the universities or the preparatory institutes.
There's a
that-
lot of levels.
That
I'm not
prepare
gonna-
students. No, you know what I mean. So, or prepare students to become teachers. So there has to be like joint responsibility for keeping teachers of color in the profession, and that's not just the school districts, it's the preparatory unit, it's the unions, it's that.
Oh,
But also looking at, once a teacher is hired, they have to have opportunities to have like hybrid positions, because being in a classroom and not being able to be a lifelong learner and learn other things, who's going to
And you also have to feel like you're not the only one and you're stuck on your own.
Right.
I mean, there's that too. I mean,
That's really
So,
hard.
so there's a lot of opportunities for
no, I'm not going to begin to say like there's one cause. I think there's a million. I firmly believe in the silver shot, whatever.
silver bullet.
No, silver buckshot, whatever you want to call it. Like it's a lot of things at once.
And I think that's part of the problem, because it's so complex. Nobody wants to do anything because there's always reasons why it's not going to work. Kind of like the opposition to the bill. Well, what are you going to do with the kids? And are you going to be able to staff them? And do we have the space for it? And so we can keep saying no, but in the meantime, there's little lives that are at stake. And so at some point, we have to sit down and say, okay, we can't ignore this problem. It's kind of like climate change. We can't ignore this problem anymore. Whatever we have to do, we're going to do, because we care enough about these little lives.
We can't. We're just going to drown.
To me too, a
When,
lot of
when I
times.
first
Whoops.
saw your bill, my immediate reaction was, what do we do with the kids that are just too disruptive to be in the class right now? And there wasn't anything in the bill that says where we go, what to do.
Well, within other areas of statute, there's a whole level of removing a child from a classroom. And so within the removal piece, there are opportunities for schools to remove children from the classroom and then to coordinate a plan around that child.
Okay.
That does not include locking them in closets.
Okay, but that kind of thing, the problem that I ran into is an immediate turnoff to your bill, unless that's explained.
Well, and also I think it's important to think about the fact that within teachers don't suspend. Teachers defer.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yep.
Principals are the ones that are ultimately doing the suspensions. And I think part of this conversation as well is we're also talking about the low pay piece here as well. And principals make more money than everyone in the school. Mm-hmm. And they also need to be part of this conversation
Yep.
on this discussion. It's like if you have a situation and I take issue with the word disruptive because when I look at what has been defined as disruptive in terms of the statistics that we have within Minnesota, there's a very wide berth with what counts as disruptive. And so, I mean, some of the examples that were given when we were testifying on the bill, there was a young girl in kindergarten that came to school with like chapstick, and she was continually putting the chapstick on in the classroom, just like smearing it on. That was identified as disruptive.
So what?
And so
My son played with his shoes.
My daughter had
Yeah.
noisy braids. She was told to keep her hair quiet.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
It's
But
like
what? Is it
not-
both- is it both
yeah,
that
The
what?
breadths in her hair.
knocking a chair over is considered disruptive.
Playing-
Talking too loudly is considered disruptive.
Tapping your
So it's the same type of thing as driving if your blinker's not.
Well, but
To some degree.
I also think that part of the challenge is it's like we paint this picture of like what do we do with the really disruptive kids, and it's like kids are disruptive.
Right.
And sometimes we do this for some disruptive children, and then for other disruptive children, it's like, oh no, you can't be here. And so really, I think what the challenge is in terms of this idea of, well, what do we do with the really disruptive kids? The way that these policies have fallen, they have fallen disproportionately on Black, brown, and disabled bodies.
Yep.
That's where this is falling. And so it's like this idea of like, what do we do with the disruptive kids just feels like such a loaded question, because it's like, define disruptive.
To me, it's more attention seeking. So you find ways to give them positive attention rather than, well, sometimes you have to acknowledge the negative, but you're giving them, and you're using strategies to lessen or stop that behavior happening.
Yeah.
You know, like if you have 20 children in a classroom and you need to do a quiet rest time, and there's just this last week, one of the kids was just up and down, and so I asked her, do you want me to read a book to you? You know, yes or no? Yes. Okay, then you need to lie down quietly throughout the whole rest time. So now I'm reading her books every day in the hallway, you know, so that once she lies down for a certain amount of time, then she's coming out in the hallway with me. And that's a positive. And then she's getting extra, like my boss said, repeated read-alouds.
Yes.
I'd also be curious if there's any impact within classrooms, and I think there probably is, when they have a reading person, tutor member in the classroom.
That's a good question.
Yeah, because we can't be counted in the ratio, but it gives you that extra person that can help. You know, you're an extra staff person.
Which I think is part of the issue too, as we raised in the beginning. It's just as classroom sizes have grown, it's harder to give that one-on-one attention.
Yeah.
That especially at that age, that kids want and need and require.
And Reading Corps pulls all nationalities for tutors. Last year, you know, because every 5 years to renew my teaching license, I need 125 hours. Last year I got in 140 hours in 1 year, so I'm good to go. And this year I'm sure I'll do it again.
With teaching licenses, Is there any requirement on like diversity training, et cetera?
There's,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you have
Oh, yeah.
to. You have to have.
Yep.
There's ELL training. There's reading training. There's tech. There is positive behavior, and then there's gen ed credits. But you have to have like 2 hours out of your 120. You don't have. There's no. It doesn't say like a fifth of your license needs to focus on positive behavior interventions. It just says you have to have a training in it. So you could go to an hour's training out of your 125 hours and make the requirements.
And it doesn't say anything about the quality of that training.
Right. It could be
or
just
follow up to that training.
Right. It could just be
My kind of
somebody
question
you're
is,
building.
how do you legislate quality? I'm not that smart.
Well, they need to look at different
No, 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 no,
evaluation.
no, no, no.
I'm saying they need to look at different evaluation of
Well,
teachers
I mean,
in terms of
sometimes-
what they're
I mean,
doing.
sometimes the like training curriculums have to be approved.
Yeah,
By,
you have to
like,
get it
the
through
district or
Yeah.
whatever.
like things smaller
But
through
you have bad teacher.
for early ed and early
Yeah.
childhood education, and it's got to be approved training.
How much do you think an active school board that understands these problems, and maybe if they don't understand them, they should, do you think is part of the problem itself?
Well, I think that, again, that's going to probably be on a case-by-case basis in terms of how engaged the school boards are with, and with some of the schools who are currently working with the Minnesota Department of Human Rights, school boards probably know more about this because they've had to enter into agreements in terms of really being able to do some correction pieces. But there is a need, I think, for education at all levels. Because you talked about the need for more access to just really appropriate curriculum to prepare people from like a teacher perspective. Principals need that as well. Superintendents need need that information. And so, in my experience, not thinking about it from just like a political perspective, but just thinking about my experience working in nonprofits in the private sector and within government, if you ever want to see any initiative survive, you typically need two things. You need the people at the top to say that it's a priority, and then you need champions on the ground who are invested in doing the work. Because even if the top is saying, oh, you really need to do this, middle management and other people can kill that if they don't think it's a good idea, because it's like, well, they're saying this, but they're not here. And flipping that, you've got champions who are on the ground trying to, focus on improving outcomes or on change. If they don't have support from those at the very top, they're very limited in what they can do. And so I think it's an important point that it's about ensuring that at all levels, so that our teachers are on the same page, our principals are on the same page, and our superintendents are as well, and that there's alignment to working on this issue and to truly addressing this issue, which means that you got to acknowledge that it's an issue.
Yeah.
That's step one.